June 5, 1944. North Wither Airfield, England. The Pathfinders. Chalk numbers scratched across olive-drab fuselages as paratroopers filed toward waiting Douglas C-47 Skytrains. Captain Frank Lillyman checked his watch. 2,150 hours. First stick, 5,002nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, ready for loading. 18 men who would jump 30 minutes ahead of 13,000 paratroopers to mark drop zones with lights and radio beacons in occupied France. Lieutenant Colonel Joel Crouch gripped the control yoke of his C-47 as engines roared to life. 3 aircraft would depart at 5-minute intervals, carrying Pathfinder teams to predetermined coordinates behind Hitler's Atlantic Wall. What none of them knew was that this single night would trigger the most devastating airborne assault in military history, overwhelming German defenses through sheer chaos rather than precision. The Third Reich had transformed the Normandy countryside into a fortress. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's defensive strategy relied on rapid counterattack by mobile reserves positioned behind coastal fortifications. Cut those response routes, and entire defensive sectors would collapse. The Wehrmacht's 91st Air Landing Division and 6th Fulcham Jurger Regiment occupied critical positions throughout the Carentan Peninsula. 7,000 German troops controlling bridges, causeways, and road junctions that connected Utah Beach to the interior of France. General Wilhelm Fall commanded these forces from his headquarters at the Château de Berneville, positioned to respond rapidly to any Allied landing attempt. The Douglas C-47 Skytrain climbed through English darkness at 140 miles per hour. Each aircraft displaced 26,900-pound fully loaded. Lieutenant Colonel Crouch commanded aircraft number 1 of 822 C-47s that would deliver the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions into Nazi-occupied France. His aircraft carried 18 Pathfinders and equipment specifically designed to guide the main force. Eureka radar beacons capable of transmitting signals to Rebecca receivers mounted in approaching aircraft. Holophane lights arranged in T-patterns visible from 2,000 feet altitude. The mathematics were unforgiving. Drop zones measured 1,000 odd by 600 yard. At 120 miles per hour ground speed, pilots had 15 seconds to identify the zone and give the green light. A 5-grid re-navigation error would scatter paratroopers across miles of enemy territory. Major General Maxwell Taylor stood before assembled officers of the 101st Airborne Division at Greenham Common Airfield. West Point class of 1922 with combat experience from Sicily and Italy. Taylor understood that airborne operations succeeded through aggressive action by scattered forces rather than coordinated unit movements. The 100's mission encompassed 4 causeway exits connecting Utah Beach to the mainland. Each causeway crossed flooded fields that RML had ordered inundated to channel Allied forces into predetermined kill zones. Seize those exits and 7th Corps could advance inland, fail, and thousands of soldiers would die trapped on the beaches. Aboard C-47 number 42-93095, Lieutenant Thomas Mee reviewed his assault plan with 17 paratroopers of Easy Company, 56th Parachute Infantry Regiment, capture the wooden bridges at Leeport, and secure causeway number 2 by the 6-3 hours. Mee had trained his men for 18 months, transforming civilians into elite airborne soldiers. But aircraft 42-93095 would never reach drop zone C. Anti-aircraft fire would tear through the fuselage at 11-12 hours, sending the C-47 spiraling into Norman soil near Beauceville-Oppel. All 5 crew members and 17 paratroopers would perish in the wreckage, including Mahan and his entire headquarters element. The American Armada crossed the English Channel in formations called serals. 9 aircraft in 3 elements of 3, maintaining 1,000 feet intervals between serals. Each serial assigned specific drop zones identified by Pathfinder beacons. The system required perfect execution under ideal conditions. Conditions over Normandy were far from ideal. A cloud bank at 1,500 feet obscured visual navigation references. Ground fog reduced visibility to less than 1 mile. German radar stations tracked the approaching aircraft from 50-mile distance, alerting anti-aircraft batteries across the peninsula. At 0001 feet hours on June 6th, Captain Lilliman's Pathfinders exited over Drop Zone A west of Sainte-Mère-Église. His Eureka beacon activated within 10 minutes, transmitting on predetermined frequencies to guide the 502nd Regiment's main force. But scattered cloud cover and enemy fire had already disrupted the formation. Only one of 5 Pathfinder teams landed within 1 mile of their assigned drop zone. Staff Sergeant John Ray commanded 3rd Squad Company F508 Parachute Infantry Regiment. 24 years old from Glendore, California, with jump wings earned at Fort Benning. Ray's squad trained specifically for night combat, practicing assembly procedures using cricket clickers and challenge passwords. Flash, a paratrooper, would whisper in darkness. Thunder came the response, confirming American identity. The authentication system assumed soldiers could find each other. Ray's C-47 dropped its stick at 0 to 30 hours, 7 miles from drop zone N. The sergeant landed in 3 feet of water, his parachute dragging him backward through a flooded field. Emergency release mechanisms jammed with mud. Ray cut himself free with his jump knife, then spent 4 hours searching marshland for his squad. By dawn, he had found 3 men from his unit and 14 paratroopers from 5 different regiments. The lost elements would become a combat force through necessity rather than planning. At 1:40 hours, the main Serals approached the Cotton Peninsula at 1,500 feet altitude. Flak batteries opened fire with 88 mm and 20 mm cannon, creating curtains of traces and explosions. C-47 pilots instinctively climbed or dove to avoid fire, breaking formation integrity. Aircraft separated by miles rather than yards. Navigators lost visual contact with lead planes. Radio silence prevented coordination. Jumpmasters could only estimate their position based on elapsed time from the coast. Green lights illuminated at intervals determined by dead reckoning rather than identified landmarks. Paratroopers exited into uncertainty, trusting that somewhere below lay French soil rather than the English Channel. Private John Steele, Company F, 505 Parachute Infantry Regiment, descended directly over Sainte-Mère-Église at 115 hours. The town square blazed with light from a burning building, illuminating descending paratroopers for German machine gunners. Steele's parachute snagged the church steeple, leaving him suspended 30 feet above the square. For 2 hours, the private hung motionless, watching German soldiers shoot his comrades as they landed. Wounded in the foot by shrapnel, Steele played dead until German soldiers cut him down and took him prisoner. He would escape when the 505's 3rd Battalion captured the town at 4:30 hours. The first French community liberated on D-Day. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole landed 2 miles from his intended drop zone near Carentan. Commander of 3rd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. Cole gathered 75 paratroopers from various units and advanced toward his objective through German positions. At 06:30 hours, Cole's improvised force encountered a German strongpoint defending the highway bridge at Carentan. 4 concrete bunkers supported by mortars and machine guns. Traditional infantry doctrine required coordinated battalion attacks against fortified positions. Cole had 75 paratroopers armed with rifles, grenades, and 1 bazooka with 3 rockets. He ordered a bayonet charge across 250 yards of open ground. The attack succeeded through sheer audacity. German defenders expecting organized resistance broke under the psychological impact of screaming paratroopers charging with fixed bayonets. Cole secured the bridge but paid heavily. 29 killed, 43 wounded. The colonel would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions posthumously awarded after his death in Holland 3 months later. General d'Artillery Erich Marx commanded German 84th Corps from his headquarters at St. Law. A veteran of the Eastern Front, where he lost a leg at Stalingrad, Marx understood mobile defense and maintained reserves to counter Allied landings. At 120 hours, Marx received reports of parachute landings across the Cottontown Peninsula, but the reports made no tactical sense. Paratroopers identified at Carentan, Surgles, Monaborg, Pontlab, and 20 other locations simultaneously. No coherent pattern emerged from the contact reports. Were these commando raids, diversionary attacks, the main invasion? Marx faced the commander's dilemma. Commit reserves against scattered paratroopers and risk having nothing to oppose beach landings. Hold reserves and allow airborne forces to consolidate behind coastal defenses. Without clear intelligence, Marx ordered local commanders to contain paratrooper landings while maintaining mobile reserves. The decision reflected sound military judgment based on available information. Mark X could not know that American scatter was accidental rather than intentional, creating chaos that paralyzed German response more effectively than any planned operation. Technical Sergeant Frank McKee landed in a walled garden near Turkville at 01:45 hours. Communications Sergeant Headquarters Company 5001st Parachute Infantry Regiment. McKee carried SCR-300 radio equipment, essential for coordinating battalion operations. The sergeant found himself alone, surrounded by 8-foot walls in total darkness. Gunfire echoed from all directions. McKee attempted radio contact but received no response. His encryption codes were useless without other radio operators. For 3 hours, McKee defended his position with his M1 Garand rifle, killing 2 German soldiers who investigated his landing site. At dawn, he linked up with 19 paratroopers assembling near a crossroads. None were from his unit. Most had lost equipment during descent. McKee became the group's de facto commander through possession of the only functioning radio. He established contact with division headquarters at 0830 hours, reporting his position and requesting instructions. The response was simple: attack toward Poopville, destroy any German forces encountered. The technical sergeant led his improvised platoon toward the village, engaging German patrols and capturing 32 prisoners. They reached Poopville at 1100 hours, linking up with forces advancing from Utah Beach. McKee's radio became the primary communication link between airborne and seaborne forces, coordinating artillery support and medical evacuation. Lieutenant Colonel William Ekman commanded the 55th Parachute Infantry Regiment's most successful drop. 75% of his paratroopers landed within 1 mile of Drop Zone O near S. Margles. Ekman assembled 600 men within 2 hours, a remarkable achievement given weather conditions and enemy fire. The 55th's cohesion allowed execution of planned objectives. 3rd Battalion captured Searle at 0430 hours. 2nd Battalion secured the bridge at La Fière. 1st Battalion blocked German reinforcement routes from Montebourg, but success created its own challenges. The regiment held a 6-mile front with 600 paratroopers against German forces that outnumbered them 10-1. Ekman established strong points at critical locations, trusting isolated units to hold until relief arrived. Private First Class Leonard Goodgull manned a roadblock north of Sainte-Mère-Église with 7 paratroopers from his squad. At 0800 hours, German reconnaissance vehicles approached their position. The paratroopers destroyed the lead vehicle with bazooka fire, blocking the road. For 12 hours, Goodgall's squad repelled German probes while running critically low on ammunition. They stripped weapons from dead Germans, using captured MG-42 machine guns against their former owners. Relief arrived at 2000 hours in the form of Sherman tanks from the 746th Tank Battalion advancing from Utah Beach. Goodgall had fired over 2,000 rounds, thrown 14 grenades, and helped hold a position that prevented German armor from reaching St. Margles during critical morning hours. The 82nd Airborne Divisions drop zones lay west of the Murderette River in terrain that appeared solid on aerial photographs, but concealed extensive marshlands. Paratroopers descended into water ranging from knee-deep to over their heads. Equipment bags weighing up to 140 pounds became anchors that drowned soldiers before they could release their harnesses. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Shanley, commanding 2nd Battalion, 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment, landed in 4 feet of water at 0220 hours. His battalion scattered across 20 square miles of flooded terrain. Shanley spent 5 hours assembling 48 paratroopers from various units. With this makeshift force, Shanley established a defensive position on Hill 30 west of the Murderette. For 3 days, his group would hold this critical terrain against repeated German attacks, preventing enemy forces from flanking the 82nd main positions. The isolation was complete. No radio contact with division headquarters, no resupply of ammunition or medical supplies. No evacuation for 37 wounded paratroopers who filled a Norman farmhouse converted to an aid station. Technician 5th grade Eugene Darnell served as the only medic, treating wounds with salvaged German medical supplies and boiled cloth for bandages. When morphine ran out, Darnell could only hold men's hands as they died from untreatable wounds. Brigadier General James Gavin, Assistant Division Commander of the 82nd Airborne, jumped with the 58th Regiment at 0230 hours. At 37, Gavin was the youngest general officer in the American Army, promoted for his performance commanding the 505th Regiment in Sicily and Italy. Gavin landed in an orchard near Les Forges, assembled 12 paratroopers, and advanced toward the Murderette River bridges. Along the route, he collected scattered elements until his force numbered nearly 300 men from 6 different battalions. At La Fière Bridge, Gavin found a critical situation. The span controlled the only crossing of the Murderette suitable for vehicles. German forces held the west bank with machine guns and mortars. American paratroopers controlled the east bank, but lacked heavy weapons to assault across the causeway. For 2 days, control of Lafayette seesaw between opposing forces. Paratroopers charged across the narrow causeway into machine gun fire. Germans counter-attacked with self-propelled guns. Bodies accumulated in the water below until they formed improvised dams. On June 9th, Gavin personally led the final assault that secured the bridge permanently. The battle cost 254 American casualties, but opened the route for armor to support the 82N isolated units west of the Murderette. Major General Wilhelm Folly commanded the German 91st Air Landing Division from his headquarters at Château de Berneville. A dedicated officer with a background that included service in Poland, France, and Russia, Fière was well versed in airborne tactics and prepared his troops to respond to parachute offensives. At 400 hours on June 6th, he was making his way back from Rennes, where the German High Command had held a military exercise. His path took him through regions where American paratroopers had touched down just hours prior. Close to Piqueville, Lieutenant Malcolm Braun's unit from Headquarters Company, 3rd Battalion, 58th Regiment, set up a quick barrier across the road. As Fall's vehicle sped closer, paratroopers began firing automatic weapons. The car crashed into a wall, and Fière succumbed to multiple gunshot injuries before he could react, becoming the first German general to die on D-Day. His demise disrupted the cohesive command structure of German forces in the central sector, leading to a disjointed defense that permitted the scattered American paratroopers to meet their mission goals. The 101st Airborne Division's operation at Causeway 2 necessitated taking control of Pouperville village at its western end. Lieutenant Eugene Dance led the 1st Platoon of Company B, 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment in this mission. At 0500 hours, Dance gathered 26 paratroopers near Pouperville. The village was defended by an estimated 40 German troops who had established fortified positions. Conventional military strategy dictated a full company-sized assault with supporting firepower. Instead, Dance split his platoon into 2 squads, attacking from both the north and south simultaneously. The assault commenced at 0530 hours, with grenades thrown through the windows of occupied structures. Paratroopers cleared the buildings one room at a time, employing both automatic weapons and bayonets. Sergeant Elma Murray forcefully kicked open the door of the village church, anticipating that he would discover German spotters in the steeple. Instead, he found 60 French civilians taking refuge from the ongoing conflict. Murray assigned guards to keep the civilians safe while his squad continued their clearing activities. By 0800 hours, Dance's platoon had succeeded in taking control over Pouperville, capturing 18 German soldiers and inflicting an estimated 20 casualties on the enemy. At 0815 hours, the leading elements of the 8th Infantry Regiment, which was advancing from Utah Beach, entered the village. The conjunction of airborne and amphibious forces was successfully achieved. Dance's weary paratroopers had secured this crucial exit from the causeway with only half the personnel and none of the supporting firepower initially allocated for the task. Battery locations at St. Martin de Varaville posed a significant threat to Utah Beach, housing 4 105mm howitzers that could wreak havoc on the naval landing operations. The 2nd Battalion of the 502nd Regiment was tasked with neutralizing these artillery pieces before the beach landings commenced. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers led a makeshift team of 15 paratroopers towards the battery at 4:30 hours. Prior to joining the military, Summers had worked as a coal miner in West Virginia, earning recognition for his exceptional shooting skills and tactical acumen. When they arrived at the battery, the paratroopers found it unoccupied. German forces had relocated their artillery days in advance, anticipating an airborne attack. However, the concrete bunkers surrounding the site still contained machine gun emplacements that could threaten advancing American forces. Summers launched a solo assault on the German positions that would enter into airborne history as legendary. He moved from bunker to bunker, killing 31 German soldiers over 2 hours of relentless combat. His Thompson submachine gun overheated and burned his hands through his gloves due to the sustained firing. Private John Camion followed Summers, carrying ammunition and repeatedly putting himself in harm's way to keep the sergeant's weapon supplied. When Summers' weapon malfunctioned from the overheating, Camion provided him with a personal firearm and continued the supply effort using a captured German MP-40. By 0700 hours, Summers had independently cleared 15 bunkers. The surviving German troops abandoned their positions and retreated towards Carentan. Exhausted, the sergeant collapsed after firing over 700 rounds and launching 28 grenades in his unaccompanied offensive. Summers was later awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his extraordinary actions, though many observers felt he deserved the Medal of Honor. He made it through the war, but the psychological impact of that morning's conflict stayed with him permanently. Meanwhile, the elite 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, specifically trained to counter airborne operations, was under the command of Major Friedrich von Donder. Von Donder, who had parachuted into Crete in 1941, understood the capabilities and weaknesses of airborne troops. Anticipating that Allied paratroopers would target this key road junction, he positioned his regiment around Carentan. His defensive strategy relied on mobile counterstrike teams supported by mortars and machine guns pre-targeted on potential drop zones. At 02:15 hours, von de Heider received intel about parachute landings occurring to the north and east of Carentan. He quickly dispatched reconnaissance patrols while keeping his main forces in reserve. The reports indicated that American paratroopers were dispersed across a 30 kilometers area with no evident concentration. The Major faced a complex tactical dilemma. Were these operatives for a larger force, distracting attacks, or perhaps misplaced paratroopers from other operations? Von Donder resolved to conduct aggressive reconnaissance, sending platoon-strength patrols to allege the American positions while holding his battalion in reserve. This decision, while logical, fell short. Scattered American paratroopers formed ad hoc combat units more quickly than the German patrols could identify and eliminate them. By dawn, von Donder's regiment faced assaults from multiple directions by forces of uncertain strength. His elite Fallschirmjäger found themselves engaged in the kind of chaotic battle they were trained to impose on others. Technician 4th grade George Koskamaki served as a radio operator in the headquarters of the 1001st Airborne Division. His aircraft dropped him 5 miles from the intended landing zone at 01:45 hours. He landed in an apple orchard, managing to keep his SCR-300 radio intact, but the antenna was damaged during his descent. For 2 hours, the radio operator tried to repair the radio while dodging German patrols. Using communication wire obtained from a destroyed telephone pole, he crafted an improvised antenna that restored partial functionality. By 0400 hours, Koskamaki made contact with division headquarters, becoming one of the earliest communication links amid the scattered units. His location turned into an impromptu command post as officers arrived to seek information. Koskamaki transmitted messages between isolated groups, coordinated requests for ammunition resupply, and provided the only trustworthy intelligence regarding German positions for 6 hours. When German mortifiers targeted his communications at 1000 hours, he moved 5 times while maintaining an uninterrupted dialogue. His radio log documented 147 messages sent and 89 received during the invasion's first day, establishing a communication network that converted chaos into effective, coordinated action. The death of Captain Thomas Meehan on aircraft 42-93095 left Easy Company of the 56th Regiment leaderless at a critical juncture. First Lieutenant Harry Welsh stepped up to take command solely because he was the highest-ranking surviving officer after the drop. He landed 2 miles from Drop Zone C with 7 men from his platoon, and as he made his way toward Causeway 2, he gathered up scattered paratroopers until his contingent totaled 43 soldiers from 9 different units. None of the troops had trained alongside one another, and most had lost their equipment during their descent. Welsh had only 1 map, 2 radios, and no heavy armaments. At 5:30 hours, his group faced German positions defending the approach to the causeway. Lacking mortars and machine guns, Welsh devised a flank attack through flooded terrain. The paratroopers waded through water up to their chests for 300 yards to approach the German defenses from an unanticipated angle. Their surprise assault proved effective even without overwhelming firepower. Welsh's troops killed 12 Germans and captured 23, securing the western entry to Causeway 2. They successfully held their ground against German counterattacks for 4 hours until relieved by reinforcements from Utah Beach. Welsh would lead Easy Company through the battles in Normandy, Holland, and Bastogne, becoming one of the most decorated officers in the 56th Regiment. His leadership on D-Day set a precedent for the aggressive strategies of small units that characterized airborne operations throughout the European theater. The glider attack commenced at 0400 hours when Waco CG-4A gliders released from C-47 towplanes at an altitude of 600 feet. Each glider was capable of carrying 13 soldiers or the equivalent weight in equipment. Jeeps, anti-tank elements, munitions, and medical supplies descended silently in the pre-dawn light. The landing zones consisted of small Norman fields surrounded by ancient hedgerows. Tall trees, reaching 50 feet, bordered areas barely adequate for emergency landings. The glider pilots had mere seconds to identify suitable fields, dodge obstacles, and crash land at 60 miles per hour. Flight Officer John Lawther piloted glider number 7, which was carrying a surgical team from the 326th Airborne Medical Company. Upon reaching the disengagement altitude, Lawther noticed that his intended landing area was blocked by crashed gliders and burning debris. He sharply banked to search for other landing sites. Ground fire hit the glider's outer fabric. Bullets shattered the plexiglass cockpit, injuring Lawther in the shoulder. His co-pilot, Flight Officer Paul Zetro, took control when Lawther collapsed over the controls. Zetro spotted a field flanked by stone walls. It was too small for normal landings, but it was the only option available. He skillfully lowered the glider, leveling off at 20 feet, and purposely spun the glider to lose speed. The Waco hit the ground at 40 miles per hour, skidding sideways across damp grass. The left wing broke off against a hedgerow. The fuselage split behind the cockpit, yet the surgical team survived with minor wounds, promptly establishing an aid station that would eventually tend to 183 injured paratroopers within the following 24 hours. Colonel Howard Johnson commanded the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment with a fervent leadership style that bordered on recklessness. Often dubbed Jumpy Johnson, he earned this nickname by his readiness to lead from the front, being the first to jump and fighting alongside his men. Johnson accurately landed on Drop Zone D at 1:30 hours, but found himself nearly alone. His regiment had dispersed over 20 miles across the Norman countryside. By 0300 hours, he had managed to gather only 150 paratroopers from an authorized total of 2,000. Refusing to wait for additional reinforcements, Johnson advanced toward his objective at La Barque Locks, which controlled the flooding of the Dove River Valley, vital to German defensive strategies. Johnson's makeshift battalion encountered fortified German strongpoints defended by machine guns and mortars. The colonel boldly led his troops into battle, charging openly with fixed bayonets. The German defenders, expecting to face organized military tactics, were psychologically traumatized by the screaming paratroopers who attacked without regard for their own safety. La Barque fell to American control at 0500 hours, though Johnson bore a significant cost, losing 43 killed and 60 wounded from his limited force. He would hold La Barque for 2 days against persistent German counterattacks, relying solely on ammunition scavenged from deceased soldiers. Johnson's bold leadership embodied the airborne spirit that turned what could have been a disaster into a tactical victory. Private Donald Burgett of Company A, 506th Regiment, landed in a flooded field at 0117 hours. At just 19 years old and hailing from Detroit, Burgett had falsely claimed to be older to enlist at 17. His parachute dragged him backward through water that completely engulfed him. He activated the emergency release, freeing himself from the harness, while his leg bag with ammunition and rations tore away during the fall. Reaching shallower water with only his rifle, bayonet, and 4 grenades, no food, and no ammunition other than one 8-round clip, Burgett moved toward the sounds of naval gunfire indicating the coast. Along the way, he came across another paratrooper entangled in a tree. Private Robert Leonard was caught 20 feet up, unable to disentangle himself from the suspension lines. As German voices drew nearer in the darkness, Burgett climbed the tree and cut Leonard free with his jump knife. The 2 men fell to the ground, just as German soldiers entered the field. For 10 minutes, they lay silently in the tall grass while the Germans searched for paratroopers. Although Leonard had fractured his ankle during the fall, he remained quiet despite the agony. Once the Germans moved on, Burgett fashioned a splint from rifle cleaning rods and parachute silk. He half-carried Leonard for 2 miles to an aid station located in a Norman farmhouse. Along their path, they neutralized 3 German soldiers and gathered weapons and ammunition that Burgett would later use during the capture of Causeway 1. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Cassidy commanded the 1st Battalion of the 52nd Regiment, employing a tactical precision that contrasted sharply with Johnson's aggressive approach. Cassidy landed near Fuquerville at 0140 hours and quickly set up a battalion command post within a ruined farmhouse. By using red signal lamps and whistle blasts, he managed to assemble 225 paratroopers by 0300 hours. He organized them into temporary companies based on the available weaponry rather than by unit designation. Machine gun teams included anyone who had ammunition. Bazooka teams paired gunners with ammo bearers regardless of their original units. Cassidy targeted the northern exit of Causeway 4, which was defended by 2 German companies supported by artillery. Instead of launching a direct assault, Cassidy executed a double envelopment maneuver, sending forces around both flanks while distracting the center. The strategy worked brilliantly. German troops concentrated on the diversion failed to notice the flanking units until they were attacked from behind. This posits wars. However, I can provide a summary or assistance with specific sections if you would like. Please let me know how you'd like to proceed. The unification of airborne troops and naval forces was finalized. However, Ekman was acutely aware of the toll it had taken. His battalion had descended with a total of 2,560 soldiers. He could only identify fewer than 700 who had survived. Some had perished, their remains strewn across the fields of Normandy. Others had sustained injuries, overwhelming medical facilities in barns and farmhouses. Numerous were simply unaccounted for, either engaged with different units or concealing themselves from enemy scouts. The colonel observed a French woman as she laid flowers on the fallen soldier, an American paratrooper who had lost his life during the nocturnal conflict. Tears streamed down her face as she tended to the blooms, grieving a brave young man who had come to deliver her village from oppression. This poignant moment transpired in various locations as French citizens emerged from their shelters to discover their towns liberated, yet scarred, their rescuers embodying both hope and the heavy burden of sacrifice. Private John Steele returned to the church where he had dangled in fear for 2 hours on the morning of D-Day. Although his foot had recovered from the shrapnel injury, he still exhibited a limp. The replica paratrooper that would one day hang from the steeple as tribute was many years away from realization. At present, he found himself surrounded by haunting recollections of comrades who had fallen in the square beneath him. As he entered the church, he removed his helmet as a sign of reverence. The walls bore the marks of bullets, and the floor was stained with blood where the injured had received care. Yet the early light flooded through shattered windows, creating a spectacle of dust particles that floated like tiny parachutes against a backdrop of golden rays. The private knelt in a pew, worn out by fatigue and emotional toll rather than from a deep faith. He had lived on when so many had perished. His vantage point, offered a singular view of history unspooling, caught between the celestial and terrestrial while chaos erupted below. This recollection would shadow him for the next 25 years. General Eisenhower made a visit to the 82nd Airborne Division on June 8th, inspecting their positions near Smagel. His itinerary included an aid station where technician 5th grade Eugene Darnell was still tending to the wounded after 3 days without rest. "How are you managing, son?" Eisenhower inquired. "Still on my feet, General," Darnell replied, his focus unwavering on the chest wound he was treating. The general observed the medic's hands, which trembled due to exhaustion, yet remained steady when tending to the injured. This encapsulated the essence of airborne combat, not the romanticized vision of heroic soldiers parachuting from the heavens, but rather weary young men tackling daunting tasks out of sheer necessity. The Supreme Commander had sanctioned the airborne operation, fully cognizant of the potential dangers. He had penned a declaration in which he accepted total accountability should the invasion fail, recognizing that dispersed paratroopers could face piecemeal annihilation. Contrary to expectations, these scattered troops managed to create a tactical surprise that significantly influenced the operation's success. This pivotal lesson would shape military strategy for years to come. Although concentrating firepower is a long-standing principle of warfare, when effectively harnessed, disorder can serve as a powerful tool. Elite units positioned behind enemy lines can exert an impact beyond their size through proactive maneuvers and independent decision-making. By June 10th, the 2 airborne divisions had merged their positions, linking up with ground forces advancing from the beaches. The 101st Division controlled the southern Cotton Peninsula, safeguarding the right flank of the 7th Corps, while the 82nd maintained the center, ensuring protection for critical roadways and river crossings. Yet the paratroopers, who had leaped into combat on June 5th, were irrevocably altered. They faced the ultimate ordeal of combat, grappling with superior forces in the pitch darkness. The survivors emerged imbued with a sense of confidence that would carry them through 11 additional months of relentless conflict in Europe. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers never shared details of his solo offensive against German fortifications. When queried about his actions, he would merely respond, "I did what had to be done." The nightmares that plagued him with screams throughout his life told a contrasting narrative. The price of extraordinary bravery manifested in chilling sweats and memories of violence. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole led his battalion through France until he was taken down by a sniper in Holland on September 18, 1944. His Medal of Honor citation detailed his courageous bayonet charge at Carentan, yet could not encapsulate the desperation pushing him towards such drastic measures. Cole had run out of alternatives, save for advancing and employing force. Private Donald Burgett made it through the war and returned to Detroit, where he labored in the automotive industry while chronicling his experiences in the airborne unit. His narratives captured the thrill and terror of dropping from the skies, the camaraderie built amid conflict, and the toll exacted on young soldiers thrust into a monumental chapter of history. Technical Sergeant Frank McKee earned a battlefield commission for his actions on D-Day, eventually concluding the war as a captain. He never forgot the solitude experienced in those initial hours, isolated in a walled garden while unseen skirmishes erupted around him. This ordeal underscored the personal nature of warfare, fought by solitary soldiers making choices under insurmountable pressures. The 2 airborne divisions prepared for another jump in September 1944 during Operation Market Garden, which sought to capture bridges across Holland, but ultimately ended in failure. They would also defend Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, attaining legendary status for their stand in that besieged city. In March 1945, they executed a jump across the Rhine River, marking the final significant airborne operation in Europe, but nothing would compare to the frantic intensity of those June nights over Normandy. 13,000 young Americans plummeting through darkness toward uncertain fates, each man confronting his own fears as he descended. Every parachute served as a delicate silk canopy, embodying aspirations for survival. What initially appeared to be tactical blunders in their deployment produced a strategic triumph. German commanders, unable to discern patterns amid the upheaval, faltered at a crucial juncture. This hesitation enabled assault forces to establish beachheads that would evolve into the liberation of Western Europe. Colonel Joel Crouch retired from the Air Force in 1962, his days as a C-47 pilot now a distant memory. Yet a photograph remained on his desk, depicting his aircraft on the runway at North Wither, with Pathfinders preparing for the flight to France. These youthful faces, eager yet anxious, were blissfully unaware that within hours they would be scattered across enemy territory. Crouch often reflected on that photograph, recalling the immense responsibility he felt that night. He had delivered those young men to their fate, sending them into the night over Normandy. Some had perished upon landing, while others fought isolated skirmishes that would remain undocumented. A handful would be celebrated as heroes, their names etched in memory. But the majority merely fulfilled their duties amid extraordinary circumstances. Nameless paratroopers who overcame German defenses through sheer audacity rather than overwhelming strength. They validated the airborne doctrine through sacrifice and valor, reshaping military strategy through tangible experience. The memorial at Sainte-Mère-Église honors the paratroopers who gave their lives to liberate the town. Bronze plaques commemorate soldiers from across the United States who journeyed thousands of miles only to perish in Normandy's hedgerows. Their sacrifice is symbolized by a dummy paratrooper suspended from the church steeple, serving as a lasting reminder of John Steele's 2-hour ordeal caught between existence and oblivion. Yet the true tribute lies in the freedom their sacrifices secured. French children growing up free instead of under Nazi oppression. American families welcoming home survivors instead of mourning endless losses from prolonged warfare. A world transformed because 13,000 brave young men dared to plunge into the shadows from an altitude of 1,200 feet. The calculations of war had anticipated an 80% casualty rate. However, the actual figure was 50%. Which, while devastating, remained bearable. Every percentage point represented dozens of young men who would return to help build post-war America. Their survival was a result of aggression, initiative, and the kind of valor that arises from having no choice but to push forward. In the subsequent decades, airborne warfare adapted through helicopters and precision-guided munitions. Nevertheless, the core principle established over Normandy remained intact. Elite soldiers positioned behind enemy lines could create strategic impacts through tactical actions. Chaos could serve as a weapon wielded by warriors adept at thriving in disorder. The legacy of D-Day's airborne operation is carried forward by every paratrooper that followed. The golden wings worn by their successors trace directly back to those desperate hours.